Here's the real reason why the Eternals didn't intervene until now. Everybody loves the Eternals, Marvel's group of immortal, superpowered beings who have evidently been chilling just off camera since the dawn of mankind. And while they clearly have helped out on occasion with irrigating crops in ancient Mesopotamia, making sure that Babylon's gardens were properly hung, and pushing Incan children out of the way of falling columns, the biggest question that fans had after the recent Eternals trailer is where were they during the Battle of New York, or Ultron's invasion of Sokovia, or when Thanos snapped half of all life in the universe out of existence in Infinity War and Endgame? I mean, those are some pretty good questions. Well, thankfully, we have a theory which not only can help explain what the Eternals have been up to, but also what the film's professed villains, the Deviants, have up their monstrous sleeves, and how all of this connects to films like Endgame and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And while this is pure speculation for the time being, if we're right about this, it could be considered a spoiler. So if you're worried about that kind of thing, make like Makari and curl up with a nice book instead. Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Now let's establish what we already know about the Eternals based on existing comic book lore, which admittedly will probably change a little bit to better suit the realities of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Created by Jack Kirby in 1976, the Eternals are an immortal race of superpowered beings, one of three distinct races created by the all-powerful Celestials, these cosmic entities that came to Earth to play this galactic version of The Sims with a bunch of apes. Now, in addition to the Eternals, the Celestials also created a bunch of helpless humans like you and me that we see the Eternals lending a helping hand to throughout the trailer. Unseen, though, are the villains of this movie, the Deviants, a bunch of murderous monsters who have been a constant thorn in the Eternal side since time immemorial. Now, presumably some of those shots we see in the trailer will also include the Eternals rescuing people from havoc wrought by the Deviants. The implication here is that the Eternals tend not to intervene in human conflicts unless a Deviant or a Celestial is involved. In the modern incarnation of the MCU, all of the Celestials are dead, at least the ones that we know of. The last living Celestial, Ego the Living Planet, perished in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 after his half-Celestial son Peter Quill and the rest of the Guardians blew him to smithereens. As for Thanos, he's technically an Eternals Deviant hybrid, so maybe they both left him alone to do his own thing because they're both like, hey, he's one of us, he's both at none at the same time, just snap away, buddy. Who knows? Either way, in the absence of Celestials, this means there's a bit of a power vacuum that the Deviants are clearly looking to fill, and the answers to how they can do it could be hiding in plain sight in the trailer. As we know from the film synopsis, something prompts the Deviants to re-emerge after going into hiding. The epic story spanning thousands of years features a group of immortal heroes forced out of the shadows to reunite against mankind's oldest enemy, the Deviants. Well, they had to reunite for a reason because the Deviants weren't around. During the trailer, we see Sprite, who I definitely have never referred to as Pixie, not even once, looking on wistfully as a volcano erupts, and we see a much cleaner shot of said volcano later in the trailer. This is almost definitely a major moment from the comics known as the Great Cataclysm that involves the Deviants getting cosmically smacked down by the Celestials. Centuries upon centuries ago, the Deviants lived in a kingdom on the continent of Lemuria, and they were at war with the kingdom of Atlantis, which was decidedly above water at the time. During this conflict, the second host of Celestials arrived on Earth to check in on their experiment, and the Deviants fired on their ship. Needless to say, these all-powerful beings were pretty pissed, so they destroyed Lemuria and sank Atlantis in the process by using their mighty abilities and opening magma vents, hence the volcano. As a result, the Deviants fled underground to lick their wounds and generally enter into a period of truce with the Eternals as their endless lives continued and time marched on inexorably. Except the Deviants slowly became radicalized over time and began worshipping something known as Tiamat, the Dreaming Celestial. As we learn in Eternals Volume 4, Number 3, this renegade Celestial found itself in direct conflict with other members of its host and fought to preserve the Deviants from being culled. Defeated, Tiamat was imprisoned in a massive vault beneath the Diablo Mountains in California, and its life force was drained into a device better known as the Vial, with a fraction of its soul turned into a key. As we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, the Celestials are immensely powerful. They're capable of wielding the Infinity Stones without getting straight up annihilated. I mean, even Star-Lord, who is half Celestial, he nearly dies using the Power Stone just to give you a sense of how strong a full Celestial really is. So in the comics, the Deviants begin worshipping the Dreaming Celestial as a god, and their religious leaders gain immense influence and power. During the events of Eternals Volume 2, Number 10 through 12, a Deviant priest lord named Gar manages to steal the power of the Dreaming Celestial for himself by drinking its essence from the vial and imbuing himself with the full might of a Celestial, which is a lot. Obviously, a megalomaniacal zealot like Gar wielding godlike power to command a legion of radicalized citizens with an axe to grind is bad news bears, not just for mankind, but for the Eternals as well. And that's what will likely be the inciting incident to bring the Eternals back together to save the world from a balance of power thrown deeply out of whack by an omnipotent madman. That is, of course, assuming they can lure Kingo away from being a Bollywood superstar, or Droog from being a cult leader, or whatever it is he's doing out there in the woods, which is pretty weird. So how can they stop such a powerful being like Gar? Well, by doing something from the comics that we also glimpse in the trailer, forming a Unimind. During the trailer, we see a brief shot of several Eternals participating in a strange ritual. By joining their consciousness together, the Eternals can combine their power to form a being stronger than any of them are on their own, called a Unimind. It's kind of like summoning Captain Planet, but if the Planeteers also ran the risk of experiencing ego death in the process, which I think they actually did cover that in a very special episode. With all of that said, this is still just a theory for the time being, because as is the case with many Marvel movies, Eternals will likely draw from a number of comic book sources ranging from the original Jack Kirby run, to the weirdness of the 1980s, to Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr.'s reinvigoration of the franchise in 2006, to Charles Knopf, Daniel Knopf, and Daniel Acuña's run in the mid-2000s. However, when one looks at all of these interpretations of the Eternals in their totality, and you compare them to the trailer, there are these through lines and clues that become evident and begin to emerge, especially in tandem with what we laid out above in this theory. So maybe we're wrong here, maybe it'll finally be Mephisto's fault, or maybe we're right. Only time will tell, and we'll be happy to see exactly what goes down when Eternals hits theaters on November 5th, 2021. Until then, we'll keep you up to date on the Eternals and all things Marvel Cinematic Universe over on Nerdist.com. In the meantime, though, folks, tell us, what do you think of this theory? What do you hope to see from the Eternals movie? And who do you think is going to be the big bad, and why? Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.